You want more freedom, more fulfillment, maybe a bigger upside than your corporate job will ever give you. But every time you think about it, this idea of actually stepping into business ownership, it brings this wave of emotions. Maybe there's some excitement, maybe there's some anxiousness, and yeah, maybe there's some fear. You start playing it out in your head. How would you do it? What obstacles would you face? And as fast as you think about the dream, all the reasons you could fail pop up too. And I get it. When I started my first business, I was 25. And here's the truth. I didn't really have any fear at that point. It wasn't because I was smart or prepared. Trust me, I was neither. I just didn't have anything to lose. I had no mortgage, no wife, no kids. I could chase something just because it sounded fun. And if it didn't work out, I had plenty of time and fallback options. But later in life, it's different. The stakes are higher. You've built a life, you got people counting on you, and you know your clock for running hard isn't infinite. So I want to tell you a story about a time I almost lost it all and what I learned from it. Now, I remember sitting across the conference table from my business partner. We were on this call with some attorneys. And at the end of about 30 minutes of this call, I asked the question, how much would it cost and how are they going to get paid? And they answered, well, about a $50,000 retainer to start. And I remember hitting the mute button and looking at my partner and saying, we can't even afford to go bankrupt. At this point, we had already been through 2 rounds of layoffs. We'd burned through our reserves. All our credit had either been maxed or pulled. And personally, I'd lost all my savings and real estate deals gone bad. Even worse, several of those deals were still caught up in lawsuits that were continuing to siphon away money that I didn't have. Also had a newborn at home. I had a wife battling postpartum depression. So maybe not surprisingly, I was an emotional wreck. One moment I'd be engaged in this frantic action trying to dig my way out of the mess I created. And the next moment, I'd see an email, a letter, maybe some other reminder of this predicament I was in, and the fear would be paralyzing. And it actually wasn't until this door to bankruptcy reorganization closed that my partner and I were finally forced to sit down and start separating out what we were really facing. Which of these fears were pointing to problems we could solve? Which ones were pointing to risks that we needed to mitigate? Now, one problem was clear. We were still carrying more people than we could afford. And this idea of letting people go was gut-wrenching because it forced us to acknowledge that we had failed. We had failed our team, the people that counted on us. But we'd also been avoiding that reality for months, and it only made things worse. The other risk that was clear was we couldn't rely on our old sales projections anymore. The recession had created this completely unpredictable environment. We had to resize the business to fit what was the current reality, not our hopes and dreams of what it could be or what it was going to return to. But that process of working through, of naming our fears, it gave us clarity. It actually took fear out of the driver's seat. And later, I realized that these emotions I was trying to bury, those fears, actually had the information I needed. My body somehow already knew what we needed to do, but we had never taken the time to figure it out, to sit with our fears and figure out what they were trying to tell us, really until it was almost too late. So in the years since those dark days of 2009, I've turned this insight into a framework that I use for identifying what my fears are signaling me to do. I call it the fog of uncertainty. And I call it that because when you're in it, fear just feels like this swirling confusion. But if you move through the fog, if you keep putting one foot in front of the other to examine those fears more closely, you can decode them. You can see what the signals are trying to tell you. Now, I found that my fears always fall into one of 3 buckets, 3 categories. It's always either a puzzle, a peril, or a pain. So my job is to decode those fears by assigning them to one of those buckets, because once I do that, the action I need to take is clear, right? I need to solve puzzles. I need to avoid perils. I need to heal my pain. So the next time you feel that fear creeping in, don't bury it. There's valuable information there. Decode it instead. And you can use my 3-step process. So step 1 is list out all your fears you can think of. All the fears that are getting in the way of you moving forward towards your dream. And once you have this big long list, you can move on to step 2, which is for each of those fears, ask yourself, is this fear a problem I can solve? Is this a peril or a risk that I need to avoid? Or is there some past pain here that I need to heal in order to move forward? And once you've categorized them, then you move on to step 3. Now for each of those fears, you look at what it's signaling you to do and identify an action you can take in the next week. So for example, if you had a problem, maybe finding an expert to advise you could help with that. For a peril, maybe it's developing a mitigation strategy or putting some clear boundary in place, saying, I won't go past this point. If I reach this point, I'm going to stop. Or for a pain, maybe that's about seeing a therapist or journaling about what from your past is triggering these current emotions. What's important is that when fear is left undecoded, it keeps you stuck. vacillating like I was in my situation between frantic action and this paralyzing avoidance. But when you decode it, fear can become fuel. It can give you clarity. It can give you energy. And it can provide the courage you need to keep moving forward toward the life you actually want. Now, I realize I'm brushing through this pretty quickly. So if you want a little more guidance on how to run a decoding your fears exercise, I've got a PDF that walks you through it with a little more detail. You can look for a link to that fear decoder in the comments. And as usual, if you got value out of this video, please like it, share it with someone it may help, and please don't quit your daydream. Cheers. See you next time.